inside America's $6 billion warships. Over 80% of the grueling labor is executed by teenagers surviving on just 3 hours of sleep, confined within windowless steel fortresses for 270 days. These junior sailors sacrifice their comfort to become the fleet's unbreakable backbone. How do they find the strength to endure an extreme environment that pushes absolute human limits? Let's uncover the astonishing, hidden reality at the very bottom of the American war machine. Right now, directly beneath the flight deck of a 100,000-ton Nimitz-class supercarrier, a staggering socioeconomic chasm exists. Above the waterline, elite commissioned aviators execute punishing 5G combat maneuvers inside $70 million F/A-18E Super Hornets. But exactly 40 feet below that 4.5-inch thick armored steel deck, the brutal reality of the lowest ranking sailors completely defies basic human logic. Here, 19-year-old enlisted seamen earning a meager base pay of $2,100 a month endure claustrophobic conditions akin to a mechanized maximum security prison. This 1,092-foot floating fortress projects absolute global hegemony, powered continuously by twin A4W pressurized water reactors, generating 260 megawatts of infinite thermal energy. Yet, the actual kinetic lifeblood of this $6.2 billion Leviathan is entirely biological. It relies exclusively on the severely fatigued junior enlisted force, the E1 to E4 deckhands, machinists, and aviation ordnance men who bear the ultimate burden of duty. They are the invisible, highly stressed cogs relentlessly grinding inside America's supreme maritime weapon. While high-ranking commanding officers safely strategize inside pristine 400 square foot climate-controlled staterooms, junior sailors face a terrifying daily geometric nightmare. The Navy mathematically crams up to 120 exhausted teenagers into high-pressure berthing compartments originally engineered for just 60 personnel. They absolutely do not get beds. They inhabit aluminum coffins measuring precisely 78 inches long and just 28 inches wide. Stacked dangerously 3 tiers high, the bottom rack sailor sleeps with a claustrophobic 18 inches of vertical clearance above a vibrating 90-degree steel floor. Modern global naval strike doctrine dictates aggressively launching a fully armed 30-ton aircraft every 20 seconds during intense peak surge operations. This brutal operational tempo generates a relentless 140 decibel concussive shockwave from 4 C-13 steam catapults that physically ruptures the lower decks. The dense atmosphere they forcefully inhale is a toxic, heavily recirculated cocktail of aerosolized JP5 aviation fuel, caustic catapult steam, and evaporated human sweat. For machinist mates permanently trapped near the 4 massive bronze propellers, natural sunlight becomes a mathematical impossibility for up to 60 consecutive days. They operate blindly in a perpetual, artificially lit fluorescent twilight zone, surviving purely on massive doses of caffeine and raw cortisol. Yet, these severely sleep-deprived teenagers manually hoist 100 90-pound AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles and 500-pound GBU 12 laser-guided bombs. They load highly volatile tactical ordnance onto wet reliable oil-slick weapon pylons, while the carrier violently pitches in 12-foot oceanic swells. One microscopic lapse in situational awareness near an F4 1.4 turbofan engine generating 22,000 pounds of vacuum thrust guarantees instant biological vaporization. The massive United States military apparatus demands absolute flawless operational perfection from the most overworked, underpaid tier of its entire command hierarchy. These extremely young American sailors willingly surrender their prime youth, psychological stability, and long-term physical health to continuously feed a ravenous nuclear beast. But surviving the crushing physical claustrophobia of a supercarrier's suffocating lower decks is merely the absolute baseline of their grim, silent suffering. Just wait until you witness the devastating psychological collapse that inevitably occurs when this relentless, 24-hour industrial killing machine pushes their fragile human minds past the absolute point of no return. The psychological collapse begins the exact second a highly trained junior enlisted sailor crosses the watertight steel threshold of their designated duty station. The United States naval apparatus operates on a ruthless, unyielding 24-hour combat rhythm. This relentless tempo fundamentally rejects basic human circadian rhythms and obliterates natural biological sleep cycles. A standard forward deployment utilizes the gruelingly deceptive port and starboard watch rotation. Mathematically, this rigid system promises 12 hours of high-stakes operational duty, directly followed by 12 hours of basic human recovery. However, that scheduled rest period remains an absolute bureaucratic illusion, masking a punishing physical reality. Junior sailors must forcefully squeeze mandatory damage control drills, exhaustive maintenance and material management checks, and basic hygiene into microscopic off-duty windows. The grim reality translates into a grueling 18-hour daily marathon of continuous manual labor. They desperately string together a maximum of 4 hours of fragmented sleep inside vibrating steel coffins. This chronic weaponized sleep deprivation systematically dismantles basic cognitive function over months at sea. It severely reduces their critical reaction times to the physiological equivalent of legal alcohol intoxication. Yet, these chronically exhausted teenagers are overwhelmingly and forcefully thrust directly into the most unforgiving industrial environment on Earth. Welcome to the V1 and V2 divisions, the terrifying epicenter of the 4.5-acre active flight deck. Here, ambient deck temperatures easily exceed 130 degrees Fahrenheit, radiating intensely from the friction-scorched, oil-soaked non-skid surface. Aviation boatswain's mates, clad in heavy float coats and impact-resistant cranial helmets, execute a highly dangerous mechanical ballet. They operate mere inches away from blazing 1,900-degree exhaust plumes of F-35C stealth fighters. They furiously sprint across slick titanium plates to manually untangle heavy arresting cables. They execute this under the crushing pressure of a rapidly closing 30-second combat launch window. The extreme mechanical violence of a carrier landing is orchestrated by the Mark 7 Mod 3 arresting gear engine. If a heavily stressed 1.5-inch steel pendant violently snaps under a 50,000-pound kinetic load, tragedy strikes instantly. The severed high tensile steel cable whips brutally across the deck at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. This kinetic snapback instantly bisects any human caught, standing in its lethal, invisible trajectory. Deep below the waterline, the daily grind morphs into an unforgiving and claustrophobic, deafening purgatory. Inside the cavernous main machinery rooms, enlisted conventional mechanics and nuclear operators battle a completely different thermal monster. Ambient temperatures in these enclosed engineering spaces routinely spike above 135 degrees Fahrenheit. This intense atmospheric heat instantly turns heavy flame-resistant coveralls into suffocating thermal traps for the operating crew. They rigorously monitor highly pressurized 600 psi steam lines powering the ship's massive catapult accumulator systems. If one of these highly stressed pipes catastrophically ruptures, it violently emits an invisible superheated vapor. This 500-degree steam is completely undetectable to the human eye and capable of instantly severing limbs. These young sailors execute complex thermodynamic calculations and critical valve alignments while actively battling severe cellular dehydration. There is absolutely zero margin for error when managing the complex mechanical systems powering a 100,000-ton behemoth. The sheer psychological weight of this immense operational responsibility crashes heavily upon fragile shoulders. These 19-year-old seamen are physically isolated from families and emotionally drained by the toxic heavy metal environment. The military systematically strips away every standard modern comfort, pushing these courageous young Americans to their absolute physical limits. Yet they miraculously adapt, forging unbreakable tactical bonds of shared extreme misery. This raw camaraderie remains the singular human element, keeping this immense, multi-billion-dollar steel leviathan functioning flawlessly. But sheer willpower can only mask compounding psychological fractures for so long. This relentless industrial meat grinder eventually shatters even the strongest baseline warriors. Their absolute darkest chapter doesn't unfold under enemy fire, but through catastrophic bureaucratic neglect right on American soil. If active combat pushes these teenagers to the edge of sanity, what horrifying tragedy occurs when the Navy permanently traps them inside a freezing, toxic shipyard construction zone? In August 2017, the 104 200-ton USS George Washington, designated CVN-73, entered Newport News Shipbuilding. This initiated a colossal refueling and complex overhaul, requiring an astronomical 25 million man-hours of labor. The military injected $3.2 billion to completely replace the uranium cores of twin 4W nuclear reactors. Yet, Naval Command catastrophically failed to allocate basic survival infrastructure for the junior enlisted crew. Exactly 422 junior sailors were forcefully ordered to physically inhabit this gutted, deactivated warship. CVN-73 ceased being a sovereign instrument of global power and devolved into a highly toxic, heavy industrial wasteland. Deafening 130 decibel pneumatic needle guns and blinding acetylene torches operated relentlessly around the clock, obliterating any chance of rest. Primary ventilation systems were completely dismantled, trapping highly volatile epoxy fumes inside the pressurized lower decks. During brutal Virginia winters, internal steel hull temperatures rapidly plummeted below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The supercarrier's critical auxiliary steam heating systems were entirely severed to facilitate deep structural bulkhead repairs. Junior sailors desperately huddled in civilian sleeping bags inside pitch-black, unheated berthing compartments, shivering uncontrollably. Unpredictable high-voltage electrical grid failures routinely plunged the massive labyrinth into absolute terrifying darkness. Basic human sanitation completely collapsed under this unprecedented administrative and bureaucratic negligence. Vital freshwater manifolds were physically locked out, stripping thousands of active duty sailors of basic hydration and hygiene. They were forced to utilize temporary, overflowing chemical toilets positioned haphazardly on the freezing flight deck. Hot showers became a non-existent luxury for enlisted personnel executing physically grueling industrial preservation labor 12 hours a day. A temporary off-ship housing facility named Huntington Hall offered a fleeting, cruel illusion of comfort. However, this dilapidated barracks was severely overcrowded and shockingly violated baseline Department of Defense standards. Each junior sailor was mathematically allotted a claustrophobic 85 square feet of personal living space. This spatial geometry is legally less square footage than a standard federal maximum security prison cell. Then, a devastating logistical betrayal struck the already psychologically fractured enlisted crew. The USS John C. Stennis, designated CVN-74, abruptly arrived at the exact same Virginia shipyard in 2021. Command callously evicted the George Washington sailors from their inadequate off-ship barracks to accommodate incoming senior personnel. These incredibly brave teenagers were completely and systematically destroyed by sheer administrative apathy and thoroughly broken chain of command protocols. Extensive congressional investigations officially confirmed what the junior enlisted ranks already painfully knew. Prolonged exposure to heavy shipyard maintenance periods astronomically increases the risk of severe mental health crises. Top naval brass publicly admitted colossal leadership failures, rapidly promising sweeping quality of life reforms and immediate psychiatric medical resources. The Naval Institution aggressively prioritized a massive hardware upgrade while completely neglecting the biological software required to actually operate it. This devastating scandal violently exposed the absolute darkest, most carefully hidden reality of modern naval service. The massive bureaucratic system fundamentally failed the exact same young warriors it was constitutionally sworn to protect. Yet, despite facing this unimaginable institutional trauma, tens of thousands of junior sailors somehow find the impossible strength to execute their grueling daily missions. What powerful, unseen psychological anchor actually keeps those broken, deeply exhausted teenagers moving constantly forward when the entire American military apparatus completely abandons them to suffer. The singular, absolute answer to this terrifying psychological paradox is definitely not found in sterile, highly produced military recruitment brochures. The powerful, unseen anchor keeping these exhausted sailors tethered to reality is forged through intense, shared tactical suffering. In the darkest, most suffocating lower decks of a 100,000-ton Nimitz-class supercarrier, an unbreakable, fierce tribal brotherhood organically materializes. When the massive naval bureaucracy fundamentally fails, these 19-year-old seamen fiercely protect each other with absolute, uncompromising loyalty. They actively create vital micro-sanctuaries of humanity deep inside this cold, unfeeling nuclear-powered leviathan. The massive aft galley, serving a staggering 18,000 high-calorie meals every single 24-hour cycle, becomes a critical psychological refuge, consuming a dense, highly processed 3,500-calorie daily ration from a $6.5 million deployment food budget transforms into a deeply sacred communal ritual. In these fleeting 15-minute microscopic windows of rest, rigid military rank completely dissolves into raw, unfiltered human connection. Highly degraded, low-bandwidth satellite internet provides a fragile, agonizingly slow lifeline to the distant civilian world. Yet, the true kinetic lifeblood pumping through their exhausted veins is the intoxicating adrenaline of raw operational execution. Simply watch a 20-year-old aviation ordnance man successfully arm a 500-pound GBU-12 laser-guided bomb in pitch black, violently rolling 12-foot oceanic swells. You will instantly witness a profound, unmatched level of visceral professional pride radiating from their heavily sweat-soaked, grease-stained faces. These lowest-ranking baseline warriors completely understand the terrifying geopolitical magnitude of their daily mechanical suffering. They are acutely aware that a single Nimitz-class supercarrier carrying an air wing of 90 advanced strike aircraft projects more sovereign firepower than 70% of all global nations combined. They clearly recognize that 330 million civilian Americans sleep peacefully solely because 5,000 overworked sailors silently secure millions of square miles of contested international waters. This crushing operational responsibility entirely transcends terrible birthing conditions and fundamentally redefines their biological identity. They willingly absorb the brutal kinetic punishment of a 140 decibel flight deck to actively ensure absolute American maritime supremacy. These exhausted junior enlisted personnel are not merely maintaining complex 600 psi hydraulic systems or scrubbing thick titanium bulkheads. They are the ultimate impenetrable biological shield, actively defending $5.4 trillion of vital global shipping trade against formidable, heavily armed geopolitical adversaries. Their silent, agonizing daily sacrifices demand our absolute, unwavering civilian respect and profound, unapologetic national gratitude. When a grueling 270-day forward combat deployment finally concludes, these hardened sailors return to civilian society fundamentally transformed. They walk down average American streets carrying a heavy, invisible crown of absolute operational supremacy that standard civilians will simply never truly comprehend. They have successfully survived severe physiological torture, navigated extreme psychological warfare, and flawlessly launched billions of dollars in highly explosive tactical ordnance. They do not loudly demand public recognition or expect special civilian treatment for their intense, quiet suffering. The massive American military war machine would instantly collapse without the unbreakable willpower of these underpaid, lowest-ranking junior enlisted heroes. They bravely surrender their precious youth to manually operate the most highly lethal $6.2 billion technological marvels ever engineered by human hands. If this deep, unfiltered dive into the harsh, classified reality of American supercarriers permanently changed your perspective, stand firmly with these young warriors today. Please hit that like button right now to honor their unimaginable sacrifices. and subscribe immediately for more highly detailed breakdowns of global military might.